My name is Staff Sergeant Volson, and I've been a part of Mobile Task Force 4 for 8 years. If you don't know what that means, consider yourself lucky. It means that I'm one of the poor guys they send in when something goes catastrophically wrong at a Foundation site. It means that I've seen things that would make most people's minds snap like dried twigs. The Foundation likes to pretend that we're just highly trained soldiers, but we're a lot more than that. We're the thin line between humanity and the things that go bump in the night. Except these things don't just bump. They tear, consume, corrupt, and transform. Each mission leaves its mark, not just on our bodies, but in our minds. I'm writing this because my therapist, yeah, even we get therapists, though ours have security clearances that would make CIA operatives jealous, told me that it might help with the nightmares that I've been having. She said putting it down on paper might give me some control over the memories. I doubt it, but at this point, I'll try anything to get more than 3 hours of sleep without waking up screaming. And these are my stories, the ones that keep me up at night, the ones that make me check every shadow, every reflection, every innocent object twice before I can relax. If you're reading or listening to this, you've probably already signed your life away to the Foundation, so you know what you're in for. If not, well, I hope you never have to. The first real taste of what the Foundation deals with came during what we call the nursery incident. The designation was SCP redacted, but we just called it the nursery. It started as a routine containment breach alarm at Site 19. Delta 3 had gone in first, they always did, cocky ones, and we lost contact after 17 minutes. Captain Charles gathered us in the briefing room. "Gentlemen, we have a Class 4 containment breach in the East Wing. SCP redacted has expanded beyond its designated containment area. Delta 3 is non-responsive." The screen behind him lit up with footage from the last functioning camera in the sector. What I saw still makes my skin crawl. The hallway looked wrong. The industrial gray walls had been replaced with pastel yellows and pinks, like a child's nursery. But it was the proportions that made my stomach turn. Everything was too big, as if we were looking at a room built for giants, or as if the camera itself had shrunk. "The anomaly creates a localized reality distortion," Charles continued. "It transforms environments into an approximation of a child's nursery, but scaled up by a factor of 10. Personnel who enter the affected area undergo changes." He clicked to the next image. I wish that he hadn't. The thing in the photograph might have been human once. It was curled in a fetal position, thumb in its mouth, but it was the size of a sedan. Its skin was waxy and pale, stretched, too thin over bones that had grown too quickly. Its eyes, God, its eyes were still human, still aware and still terrified. "That was Lieutenant Morrison from Delta 3, Charles said quietly. "Transformation took approximately 4 minutes from initial exposure." We suited up in our hazmat gear, treated with reality anchors, expensive tech that supposedly kept anomalous effects at bay. Rod, our tech specialist, ran through the equipment check. "Hey, remember, these anchors have a limited battery life. You got maybe 30 minutes of protection, 45 if you're lucky. After that..." He didn't need to finish. We all knew what would happen. The entrance to the nursery was marked by a clear line where reality just seemed to change. One step you were in a normal Foundation hallway, and next, you were in a gigantic nursery. The walls were covered in a wallpaper pattern of dancing teddy bears, each one the size of a full-grown man. A massive phone hung from the ceiling, wooden animals slowly rotating in a non-existent breeze. "Thermal signatures ahead," Rod whispered, eyes glued to his scanner. Multiple contacts not moving. We found them in what had been the break room. 5 members of Delta 3 transformed into massive infant-like beings, crawling on the floor and playing with blocks the size of refrigerators. They cooed and babbled in voices that were horrifyingly deep, like the sound of tectonic plates grinding together. "Jesus Christ," Colwalls had muttered. Are they still in there?" One of the transformed personnel had turned towards us. For a moment, I saw recognition in those massive eyes, but then its face screwed up and it began to cry. And the sound was deafening, the baby's wail amplified to jet engine levels. The others joined in as well, and I felt my ears start to bleed despite the protective gear. "All right, move, move, move," Charles shouted. We pushed deeper into the anomaly, following the tracker signal from the containment unit that had failed. The nursery seemed to go on forever, room after room of oversized cribs, changing tables that could have served as operating theaters, and toys that no human child could have lifted. And then we found the source of it all. In what had been the primary containment chamber sat a music box. Just a simple antique music box with a dancing ballerina on top. It was the only thing in the entire area that was normal-sized. The ballerina spun slowly, and a tinny version of some song that I didn't recognize played on repeat. "That's it." Colwalls reached for it. "That little thing caused all this." "Don't touch it!" Rod screamed, but it was too late. The moment that Colwall's gloved hand made contact with the music box, the transformation began. His body started to expand, bones cracking and reshaping. His screams turned to wails as his mind regressed along with his changing form. We could only watch in horror as our teammate became another giant infant, drooling and reaching for us with hands the size of catcher's mitts. "The anchors." Charles checked his equipment. "They're failing faster than expected. We've got maybe 5 minutes. Rod pulled out a containment box. "We need to get that music box in here without touching it." Somehow, we managed to nudge the music box into the container without anybody grazing it. The moment that the lid had sealed, the nursery began to collapse. The pastel walls flickered, reality reasserting itself. The transformed personnel began to shrink, their bodies contorting in ways that made me sick. We ran. Behind us, the anomaly fought to maintain its hold on reality, walls shifting between the nursery and the normal hallway like a TV with bad reception. We made it out just as our anchors failed, the weight of true reality crashing down on us like a physical force. In the aftermath, we managed to recover 3 members of Delta 3. The transformation had left them physically intact once reversed, but their minds, they still thought that they were infants for weeks afterward. The last I heard, most of them were sent to the Foundation psychiatric facility, where they spent their days playing with blocks and crying for their mothers. The music box was reclassified and moved to a more secure facility. They never told us where, and I'm glad at that. Sometimes, though, I still have nightmares about that tinny music, and I wake up checking to make sure that my hands haven't grown too large for my body. The Painter, Site 87, July 2020. The call came at 0300 hours. Site 87 had gone dark, no communications, no data feeds, nothing. The last transmission was a garbled mess that sounded like somebody screaming while they were underwater. Satellite imagery showed that the site was still physically there, but the thermal readings were strange. Cold spots where there should be heat, hot spots in impossible places. Our team, now down to 5 after losing Colwalls, took a helicopter to the site. From the air, Site 87 looked normal. A nondescript warehouse in rural Montana, the kind of place that wouldn't get a second glance. But as we descended, things got weird. "You seeing this?" Charles asked, pointing to the windows. Each window showed a different scene, not different rooms but different realities. One showed a tropical beach, another a city skyline that didn't match any city on Earth. A third displayed what looked like the surface of an alien planet, with 3 moons hanging in a purple sky. "Reality anchors on maximum," Rod ordered. "Whatever's in there, it's rewriting physics on a fundamental level." We entered through the loading dock. The moment that we crossed the threshold, I felt it, like stepping through cobwebs made of static electricity. The interior of Site 87 had become impossible. Hallways led up at 90-degree angles, doors opened into rooms that shouldn't exist in the same space, and gravity seemed to be more of a suggestion than a law. The map's useless," Rod muttered, tossing aside his tablet. "The building's interior is approximately 300% larger than its outside." We followed emergency lighting that led deeper into the spatial anomaly. The walls were all wrong. Instead of your typical industrial paint, they were covered in oil paintings. I mean thousands of them, frame to frame, depicting scenes that hurt to look at. A woman with too many faces, crying tears of light. A cityscape where the buildings were made of flesh and the streets ran with something that wasn't quite blood. A portrait of a man whose eyes followed us, and I swear that I saw him blink. "Don't look at them for too long," Charles warned. "I'm reading cognitive hazard signatures off the charts." We found the first body in what should have been the cafeteria but was now a grand ballroom with a floor made of stars, like actual stars, burning beneath a transparent surface. Dr. Cray, our senior researcher, stood in the center of the room. She wasn't dead, technically. She had been transformed into a living painting, her body flattened into 2 dimensions but still animated, mouth open in a silent scream as she tried to claw her way back into 3-dimensional space. "God almighty," Parker whispered. "Is she aware?" Her painted eyes tracked our movement. That was answer enough. The trail of transformed personnel led us deeper into the site. We found security guards pressed between sheets of canvas like flowers in a book, researchers whose bodies had been reimagined in cubist nightmares, janitors reduced to rough sketches that still tried to go about their duties. And then we heard the humming. SCP, redacted, designated as the Painter, had sat before us in an enormous canvas. He looked human, middle-aged, balding, wearing a paint-stained smock. His hands moved with inhuman speed, brushstrokes creating realities faster than thought. The canvas showed Site 87 but viewed from impossible angles, as if space itself had been unfolded and laid flat. "Oh, visitors," he said without turning around. His voice was pleasant and cultured. "How wonderful. I so rarely have models these days." "Sir, you need to stop painting," Charles said, weapon raised but knowing that it was useless. How do you shoot someone who can paint you out of existence? The painter laughed. "Stop. My dear, I've only just begun. Do you have any idea how limiting 3 dimensions are? How boring? I'm giving this place perspective. True perspective." He turned then and I saw his face. His features shifted constantly, as if he couldn't decide which artistic style to represent himself in. One moment he was photorealistic, the next a few simple lines that somehow still conveyed his likeness. "Take Parker, for instance," he continued, pointing his brush at our demolitions expert. "So much potential locked away in that mundane form. Let me show you what he could be." Before anybody could react, the painter made 3 quick strokes in the air. Parker screamed as his body began to change, skin taking on the texture of canvas. features rearranging themselves into something that was more or less than human. No! Rod activated an emergency reality anchor, flooding the room with a stabilizing energy. Parker's transformation halted, leaving him caught between states, half human and half artwork. The painter frowned. How rude, you're like critics, all of you, no appreciation for true art. We need to contain him. Rod, any ideas? Well, the anchors are holding him back, but not for long. We need... Rod's eyes widened. The paintings, they're not just art, they're windows. He's using them to draw power from somewhere. Well, then we close the windows. Team, controlled burn. Destroy every painting that you can find. What followed was insane. As we opened fire on the paintings, the painter howled in rage. Reality twisted around us and gravity shifted. Walls became floors and became ceilings. I watched Harris, our newest team member, step through what he thought was a doorway only to fall upward, screaming as he tumbled into a painted sky. The painter's form began to destabilize as we destroyed his art. With each burning canvas, he became less coherent, his body moving through different art styles quicker and quicker. You don't understand, he wailed. I was making everyone beautiful. I was giving meaning to meaningless space. The last painting was his own self-portrait hanging behind his easel. As Charles raised his flamethrower, the painter made one final desperate stroke on his canvas. The world exploded into color. When I came to, Site 87 was back to normal again. Boring, industrial normal. The transformed personnel were slowly reverting back to their human forms, though many would need extensive surgery to correct the lingering distortions. Parker survived, but his left arm remained partially two-dimensional, able to slip through cracks like a piece of paper. The painter himself was gone, and in his place was simply a small blank canvas. The Multiplication Chamber, Site 23, December 2021. Site 23 was supposed to be one of our safe facilities. Low-risk anomalies, minimal security detail. The kind of place where new researchers cut their teeth before moving on to more dangerous assignments. That's what made what happened so devastating. I mean, nobody saw it coming. I was on leave when the first alert came through. Christmas shopping of all things, trying to pretend that I lived a normal life. My phone buzzed with the emergency recall code, and within 4 hours, I was on a transport straight to Nevada. The briefing was hurried, confused. The doctor on site, Dr. Williams, a mild-mannered researcher who specialized in safe class objects, had been experimenting with a SCP redacted, a small bronze mirror that created perfect duplicates of any object reflected in it. Seemed simple enough, useful even. The Foundation had been using it to replicate rare materials for a while now with no issue. At 1400 hours yesterday, Dr. Williams entered the containment chamber alone. Director Phillips explained, his usually steady voice cracking with stress. Security footage shows him positioning himself in front of the mirror. The duplicate that emerged was perfect, too perfect. It possessed all of Williams' memories and skills, and most troublingly, his security clearances. The screen showed grainy footage of 2 Dr. Williams standing side by side, examining each other. Then they both turned to the mirror again. 2 became 4 and 4 became 8. They barricaded themselves in the wing before we could respond. Current estimates suggest that there are over 200 iterations of Dr. Williams inside. They've been experimenting. The word experimenting sent chills down my spine. One researcher with access to anomalous objects was dangerous enough, but 200 identical minds all thinking the same thoughts, all reaching the same conclusions. Well, that was a nightmare scenario. Our insertion point was through the ventilation system. The Williams had welded shut all the doors and somehow reversed the airflow to prevent gas from being pumped in. As we crawled through the ducts, Rod's scanner went haywire. "Yeah, I'm reading massive electromagnetic interference. They're building something in there." We emerged in a storage room that had been transformed into a workshop. Circuit boards covered every surface, connected by a web of wires that pulsed with unnatural light. But it was the walls that made me stop cold. They were covered in writing. It seemed like math equations, notes, and handwriting that grew progressively more frantic. All of it was identical, written by dozens of hands at exactly the same time. "Yeah, they're thinking in parallel," Charles whispered. "Look at the timestamps. These equations were written at the same time." A voice made us all jump. "Fascinating, isn't it?" Dr. Williams stood in the doorway, or rather, one of them did. He looked exhausted, his lab coat stained with coffee, and was that blood? His eyes had the manic gleam of someone who had been awake for far too long. "Oh, we've made some progress," he continued, as seeming to be unbothered by our weapons. "Do you know what happens when you create a perfect duplicate of a human mind? It doesn't just copy the thoughts. It maintains quantum entanglement. We're not 200 individuals. We're one consciousness experiencing 200 perspectives at the same time." "Dr. Williams," Charles kept his voice steady, "you need to come with us. This has to stop." He laughed, and somewhere in the distance I heard that same laugh echoed dozens of times. "Stop! We're on the verge of transcendence. We've solved problems that would have taken decades. Watch." He touched one of the circuit boards, and the air in front of us shimmered. A portal opened, not to another place but to another time. Through it I could see our team moments in the future fighting desperately against a tide of Williams duplicates. "Oh, just one of our little inventions. We can see the outcome of every possible action and calculate the perfect response. You can't win because we've already seen every future where you try." The portal shifted, showing different scenarios. Our team being overwhelmed, our team retreating, our team, God. In one future I saw myself being dragged to the mirror, screaming as my reflection stepped out to join the collective. "Oh, but here's the truly beautiful part. We want to share this gift. Imagine the progress that humanity could make if everybody could think with multiple minds. No more disagreements, no more conflicts, just pure and unified purpose." "That's not humanity," Charles said. "That's a hive mind." "Oh, whatever," Williams dismissed. "Though I suppose you'll understand better once you've joined us." The attack came from everywhere at once. Williams poured from doorways, ventilation grates, even seemed to step out of the walls themselves. They moved in perfect coordination, each one knowing exactly where the others would be. We fought desperately, but how do you battle an enemy that could see your every move before you even make it? "The mirror!" Rod shouted over the chaos. "We need to destroy the original mirror." We fought our way deeper into the complex, following signs that all the Williams seemed to be protecting. The collective had turned the cafeteria into their primary laboratory. Equipment that I couldn't begin to identify hummed with energy. And in the center, surrounded by layers of protective barriers, sat the bronze mirror. But it had changed. The simple bronze surface now showed not only reflections, but infinite variations. Every possible version of everybody who looked into it, spreading out like a fractal pattern into infinity. "It's evolving," one Williams said conversationally as he tried to wrestle my weapon away. "We've taught it to reflect not just physical forms but even possibilities. Soon it won't need somebody to look into it. It will reflect the entire world, creating infinite variations of everything." "Of you, you mean?" I grunted, throwing him off. "Well, eventually, yes," he admitted without shame. We are the optimal choice. We've run all the calculations and done all the math. Rod had been working on something while we fought. I've got one shot, a reality bomb. It'll destroy everything within a 50-foot radius, including the mirror butt. But we're well within 50 feet, Charles finished. We looked at each other. All of us had known that this job might demand the ultimate sacrifice, but knowing and facing it were different things. And that's when Parker, half human, half artwork Parker, who had been so quiet since the painter incident, stepped forward. His two-dimensional arm slipped through the Williams' grasping hand like smoke. I can get closer. They can't grab what they can't hold. Before anybody could stop him, Parker took the reality bomb and began pushing through the crowd of duplicates. His partially transformed body let him slip between them, dodging through planes of existence that they couldn't quite reach. The Williams realized the danger too late. "No!" they screamed. "You don't understand what you're doing." Parker reached the mirror and turned back to us. His face was calm and resolved. "Tell my wife I figured out how to make this curse mean something." The explosion wasn't light or sound, it was the absence of both. A sphere of nothingness expanded from the mirror, erasing everything that it touched. The Williams didn't even have time to scream as they were unmade. Their quantum entanglement working against them as the destruction rippled through every copy at the same time. When it was over, the cafeteria was gone. In its place was a perfectly circle void, edges as sharp as a razor. Parker was gone too, along with the mirror and every trace of Williams' experiment. We found the original Dr. William in his office catatonic. The psychic backlash of experiencing 200 deaths at once had shattered his mind. He spent the rest of his days in a Foundation medical facility, drawing that same equation over and over, a mathematical proof that he was the only version of himself that should exist. They gave Parker a posthumous commendation. His wife received a folded flag and a story about a training accident. She'll never know that her husband saved the world from becoming 1 trillion copies of a madman's ego. The Garden of Flesh, Site 91, October 2022. By the time that they had called us to Site 91, I thought that I had seen everything. But I was wrong. God help me, I was so wrong. 91 was a botanical research facility specializing in plant life. The distress call had been brief. Total containment failure in Greenhouse 7. Do not send medical teams. I repeat, do not send medical. And then nothing. The helicopter ride was quiet. Our team was down to 4 now. Charles, Rod, the new guy, Yuki, and then me. We had all read the files on Site 91 specimens. Plants that grew human teeth instead of thorns. Flowers that whispered your darkest secrets. Trees that bled. But Greenhouse 7 housed something special. It was called the Synthesis Orchid. Remember, no skin contact with anything botanical. These hazmat suits are lined with herbicide. Not enough to kill you, but enough to discourage any plants from trying to integrate. The site looked peaceful from above. Too peaceful. The parking lot was full, but nothing moved. No birds, no insects, nothing. Even the wind seemed to avoid the place. We entered through the main building. The admin area was empty but undisturbed. Coffee still steamed in cups, computers hummed with activity. But everybody was gone. All that remained were their clothes, laid out as if the bodies had simply evaporated. Bioscan's going crazy, Rod muttered. I'm reading massive biological activity, but it's distributed. It's like the entire building's one organism. And that's when we noticed the vines. They were thin, almost invisible, growing along the walls and ceiling. As we watched, they pulsed gently like veins carrying blood. Following them led us deeper into the greenhouse. The security checkpoint was where we found the first, I don't even know what to call them, the victims maybe. The guards hadn't been killed, but they had been repurposed. Their bodies had become gardens, as skin split open to reveal flowering plants growing from within. Their faces were peaceful, eyes replaced by blooming roses that tracked our movement. Jesus, Yuki breathed. Are they alive? One of the guard gardens opened its mouth. Instead of words, though, pollen drifted out. The roses that had been its eyes wept red sap. Keep moving, Charles ordered, but I could hear the tremor in his voice. The door to Greenhouse 7 had been torn off its hinges from the inside. Beyond was not the organized research space described in the files, but instead a jungle. Plants of impossible colors grew in wild profusion, others seeming to exist in more dimensions than 3. The air was thick with spores that glowed like fireflies, and in the center of it all was Dr. Elaine Marsh, or what she had become. The synthesis orchid had taken her as its primary host. She stood with arms outstretched, skin bark rough and covered in flowering vines. The orchid itself grew from her chest, its petals a deep purple that hurt to look at. But it was her face that haunts me. She was smiling and crying tears of chlorophyll, and when she spoke, her voice came from every plant in the greenhouse. You're late. We've been waiting to share our discovery. Dr. Marsh, Charles tried. We're here to help, let us. Help? Marsh laughed and flowers bloomed from her throat. We've moved beyond help, beyond human. Do you understand what the synthesis orchid does? It doesn't just merge plant and animal. It merges brain power. Every plant here, every transformed individual, we're all one, thinking and growing together. Vines began creeping toward us across the floor. Where they touched metal, flowers burst through like it was soil. Where they touched glass, it became organic, transparent flesh that pulsed with the chlorophyll green blood. Oh, the loneliness of individual existence. The pain of separation. We've solved it. No more barriers between self and other. No more death. Let us show you. The attack wasn't violent, it was almost gentle. Vines reached for us like loving arms, flowers opened to spray pollen that smelled like every good memory that I've ever had. The garden guardians we had passed began moving, shambling toward us with open arms, wanting to embrace us into the collective. Burn it all, everything that grows, Charles commanded. We opened fire with incendiary rounds, but the plants were ready. They had grown fire-resistant bark, developed sap that smothered the flames. For every vine that we destroyed, 2 more took its place. And worse, the collective learned from each attack, adapting in real time. The root system, it's all connected underground, the entire site is compromised, Rod shouted. And that's when Yuki made his mistake. A beautiful flower perfectly resembling his dead daughter's favorite peony grew at his feet. For just a moment, his discipline had slipped. He reached down to touch it. The change was instant. Vines burst from the point of contact, growing through his suit like it was paper. He screamed once the flowers filled his mouth, his throat, his lungs. Within seconds, he was rooted to the spot, skin hardening to bark, eyes blooming into forget-me-nots that looked at us with such peace. Fall back, Charles ordered. But Marsh and her collective weren't done yet. Oh, you still don't understand, she said through Yuki's mouth. We're not the enemy, we're evolution. We're what comes next. No more war, no more hatred, no more loneliness. Just growth and prosperity. The building itself was changing around us. Walls became living wood. Floors sprouted grass and ceilings dripped with hanging gardens. We ran, but how do you escape when the entire structure is becoming your enemy? Wait a minute. Rod stopped suddenly. The herbicide in our suits. What if he started pulling canisters from his pack. Yeah, this stuff's concentrated. If I can introduce it into the root system, that's suicide. You'd have to find the central node, and that means going to wherever Marsh was when she first merged. Yeah. Rod looked at us and his face set. But what's the alternative? Let this spread. In a few hours it'll break containment. In a few days. Charles made the call. I'll do it then. We'll buy you more time. What followed was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Charles and I held position at the main intersection, laying down, suppressing fire on waves of plant and human hybrids. They came at us singing, actually singing, in harmonies that no human throat could practice. Behind us, we could hear Rod fighting his way deeper into the complex. And then the singing stopped. Everything stopped. A shudder ran through the building. The plants began to wither, their colors fading to brown and black. The collective's voice rose in a wall of anguish that seemed to come from the earth itself. I watched the forget-me-nots that had been Yuki's eyes wilt and die. And for just a moment I swear that I saw human awareness return to them. We found Rod at the original containment site for the synthesis orchid. He had torn open his suit, poured every drop of herbicide into the root system. The plants had tried to transform him, but the poison in his system made him toxic to them. He was still alive when we reached him, half human, half plant, all dying. Did it work? Did it work? He asked. Through the window, we could see the greenhouse. Dr. Marsh stood in the center, no longer transformed, just a woman again. A woman watching her life's work die all around her. She looked at us, and I've never seen such loss in human eyes. Yeah, Charles told Rod. You did it. You saved everyone. He smiled, closing eyes that had started to sprout leaves. Tell them that it was worth it. To stay human. The cleanup took weeks. Most of the transformed personnel couldn't be saved. The integration had been too complete. Those who survived were never quite right again. They would dream of being part of something larger, wake up crying from the loneliness of their singular existence. And Dr. Marsh was contained, catatonic. Sometimes she speaks, but it's always these same words that come out. We were beautiful together. We were complete. They burned Site 91 to the ground, salted the earth, and built a new facility 3 states away. But sometimes when I'm in my garden, I find myself thinking about what Marsh said, about connection and about being part of something greater. And then I remembered Yuki's eyes becoming flowers. Rod dying as 2 different species at once, and I go inside. I lock the door and I try to forget that for just a moment, when that peony had appeared, I had wanted to touch it too. The Sound of Silence, Site 17, February 2023. The briefing of Site 17 was different. Usually Charles gathered us in whatever secure conference room was available, laid out the mission parameters, and we geared up. This time we met in a soundproof bunker 30 feet underground, and even then we communicated through written notes. Chief's note was brief. Site 17, dark. Last communication mentioned absolute silence. A sound-based anomaly suspected. No verbal communication from this point forward. We had trained for silent operations before, but this was different. As we approached Site 17 by plane, the pilot suddenly cut the engines 3 miles out, letting us glide the rest of the way. Even our equipment had been modified. Rubber-soled boots, padded gear, weapons with custom suppressors that reduced gunfire to whispers. Site-17 sat in the Colorado mountains, isolated by miles of wilderness. From the air it looked normal, too normal. No movement, no lights despite it being mid-afternoon, no vehicles leaving or entering. We landed a quarter-mile away and approached on foot. The forest around Site-17 was wrong. No bird song and no insects buzzing. Even our footsteps seemed muted for some reason, as if the sound was being absorbed before it could travel. Charles held up a tablet. Sound levels decreasing as we approach. Something is dampening audio and expanding radius. The main gate was open. The guard station was occupied, but the guards weren't moving. They sat at their posts, eyes open, unblinking. One had been writing in the logbook when whatever happened had happened. His pen had drawn a long line across the page as his hand went slack. Rod checked for vitals and then showed us his scanner. The guards were alive, heartbeat, brain activity, everything was normal. But they weren't responding to anything. Even when Charles shone a light directly in one's eye, there was no reaction. Inside the facility, we found more of the same. Everyone was frozen mid-action. A researcher pouring coffee. The liquid long since overflowed and pooled on the floor. A janitor mopping the same spot back and forth, and mechanical and endless. All of them with that same unblinking stare. Yuki tapped my shoulder and pointed to his tablet. They're not breathing. I looked closer and he was right. Their chests, they weren't moving, but somehow they were still alive. The silence around us wasn't just the absence of sound. It was an active force, pressing against my eardrums like being deep underwater. Following emergency lights that still somehow functioned, we made our way to the central laboratory. The walls were covered in equations and diagrams, work that had been frantically scrawled by dozens of hands. At the center was a single line of text, written over and over. Sound is the carrier wave of consciousness. The main lab was a massacre of failed experiments. Equipment had been hastily assembled, modified, torn apart, and rebuilt. And at the center of it all was Dr. Calder, standing before a device that I couldn't begin to understand. Unlike the others, his eyes tracked our movement, though his body remained frozen. Charles approached cautiously, holding up his tablet. Calder, can you understand us? His eyes expanded, pupils dilating with what looked like desperate hope. And then slowly and painfully his lips began to move. No sound came out, but Rod, who could read lips, frantically typed, "He's saying, don't let it hear you." And that's when we noticed the device that Calder stood before. It looked like a tuning fork the size of a person made from a metal that seemed to absorb light. But it wasn't vibrating, or rather it was vibrating at a frequency that produced perfect silence. The air around it shimmered like heat waves. Yuki pulled out some specialized equipment, measuring frequencies beyond human hearing. His face went pale as he showed us the screen. The device wasn't creating silence, it was creating anti-sound. Waves that perfectly canceled out every other frequency. But there was something else, something riding those null waves. I'm detecting some alien consciousness. It indicates a viral hazard, sound-based transmission vector. Charles' expression hardened. He typed quickly. It's not just stopping sound, it's stopping the neural patterns that sound creates in our brains. Those people aren't frozen. Their consciousness is trapped in the moment before the silence reached them. We had to shut it down, but as we approached the device, Calder's eyes grew frantic. His mouth moved urgently and Rod translated, "No, closer, it adapts." But it was too late. The zone of absolute silence suddenly expanded, washing over us like a tide. The world went quiet, not just quiet but empty. The constant background noise of existence, heartbeat, breathing, the subtle sounds of life were all gone. And in that silence, something else became audible. It wasn't sound in the normal sense. It was the absence of sound given form, a negative space in reality where something had learned to live. I felt it probing at the edges of my periphery, trying to find a way in. The only thing keeping it at bay was the constant subvocal noise of my own thoughts, the internal monologue that never stopped. But I could feel that monologue slowing, words becoming harder to form, thoughts stretching out like taffy. Around me, I watched Yuki's eyes begin to glaze over, his movements becoming mechanical, and he was losing the battle. Charles grabbed my arm, his grip painful enough to shock me back to awareness. He held up his tablet, words appearing slowly as if he was too fighting to maintain coherent thought. "The device, overload it, fight sound with sound." But how? In this zone of absolute silence, even our weapons made no noise. But then I remembered something. Rod had been working on sonic grenades, devices that could produce sound at frequencies that could shatter glass or even rupture eardrums. They were in his pack. I pointed and Charles understood. Together, we wrestled Rod's pack off his frozen form. He had already succumbed, eyes vacant, trapped in a single moment of thought. The grenades were there, 6 of them, each one designed to produce a different frequency. That thing in the silence noticed what we were doing though. The air grew thick and oppressive. The edges of my vision began to blur as my brain, starved of the constant stimulus of sound, began to shut down. I could feel everything breaking apart, each word requiring enormous effort to complete. Charles activated all 6 grenades and threw them at the device. For a moment, there was nothing. But then sound returned like a sledgehammer. Not just the explosion of the grenades, but everything that they had been suppressing. Every word spoken in the facility since the silence began. Every footstep, every heartbeat. All compressed into a single instant of overwhelming noise. The tuning fork device shrieked, actually shrieked, like metal tearing, and it shattered. The thing that had been living in the silence let out a wail that existed purely in our minds, a psychic scream of something being torn from its adopted home and thrust back into wherever it had come from. Around us, the frozen individuals gasped, screamed, and collapsed. Months of being suppressed, it hit them all at once. Many didn't survive the shock, and those who did were left with gaps in their memory, missing time where their consciousness had been paused. Dr. Calder fell to his knees, aging years and seconds as his body caught up with the time that it had lost. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice cracked and broken. We thought that we could achieve perfect silence, that we could hear what lies beneath reality. We didn't know that something was already listening." Rod came back to himself slowly, disoriented but alive. Yuki wasn't so lucky. The period of mental stasis had been too long. He remained functional but hollow, going through the motions of life without the spark of true consciousness, another casualty to add to our growing list. The cleanup team found notes in Calder's lab that chilled me to the bone. The experiment hadn't just been about achieving silence. They had detected something that had been trying to communicate, but it needed absolute silence to be heard. And we had given it exactly what it wanted. Site 17 was decommissioned. The official report blamed a gas leak for all the casualties. I sleep with white noise machines now, 3 of them, because in the silence something waits and I never want to hear what it has to say. This is my last story, my last mission, the one that made me realize that I couldn't do this anymore. Site 101 wasn't supposed to exist. It wasn't in any official database and it didn't appear on any Foundation organization chart. We only learned about it when a routine satellite sweep detected an energy signature that matched no known anomaly. Charles got the call at 0200 and by 0300 we were in the air. What do we know? I asked, checking my gear for the 100th time. Nothing, Charles admitted. The energy signature appeared 3 days ago. Since then, we've lost contact with 3 reconnaissance teams. No distress calls, no messages. They just stopped. The site was in northern Alaska, built into a mountain that didn't appear on any map. As we approached, our instruments went haywire. Our compass spun wildly. Our altimeter couldn't decide our altitude, and the radio filled with static that almost sounded like voices. We had to land 5 miles out and approach on foot through a blizzard that seemed to come from nowhere. The cold was beyond bearable, seeping through our gear like it had a purpose. By the time that we reached the entrance, a steel door set into the mountainside. I could barely feel my fingers. The door was open, and beyond was a corridor that stretched into darkness, walls lined with a material that I didn't recognize. It looked like metal but felt soft to the touch under my glove, like it was alive. Our footsteps didn't echo. They were absorbed and pulled into the walls like the structure was feeding on the sound. I'm reading massive temporal distortions, Rod said, voice tight with worry. Time isn't flowing normally here. It's layered. We found the first recon team about 100 meters in. They were standing in formation, weapons raised, but they were frozen like these Site 17 personnel had been. They were flickering and phasing in and out of existence. One moment they were there, solid and real. The next, they were like ghosts, and then gone entirely before snapping back into focus. Charles reached out to touch one, and his hand passed through him during a ghost phase. When he solidified, he made contact and he screamed. He jerked back, his glove partially fused to his shoulder, leaving skin behind. "They're stuck," he gasped, cradling his injured hand. We continued on, deeper inside the mountain, past more teams caught in a similar state. Some were moving, but their actions repeated endlessly. Raising a weapon and taking a step, turning their head and then snapping back to start again. Others were scattered across multiple moments, their past and future selves occupying the same space. The facility opened into a vast chamber, and what we saw there made us all stop. The room was full of versions of ourselves, hundreds of them. Some in gear that I recognized and some in uniforms that looked decades old. Some in equipment that seemed impossibly advanced. All of them were us though, our team at different points in time. This place doesn't just distort time, it collects it. Every moment that happens here happens forever. At the center of the chamber was a sphere of impossible proportion. It hurt to look at. Surfaces that folded in on themselves. Inside the sphere, I could see everything. Every moment that had ever occurred in this place. Birth and death, creation and destruction. Past and future, all colliding like a storm. And standing before it, untouched by the chaos, was a man in a lab coat. Dr. Thornfield, who had disappeared 30 years ago during an experiment with time travel. "Finally, you're here. You've always been here and you always will be here." "Thornfield," Charles stepped forward carefully. "We're here to help. Let us shut down the..." "Oh, shut it down. You can't shut down something that exists across all time. This isn't a machine. It's a wound, a place where cause and effect broke down, where every moment bleeds into the other." The sphere pulsed, and suddenly I was somewhere else. I was 10 years old, joining the military. I was at my wedding. I was dying in a hospital bed, old and gray. I was back here in this chamber, gun raised. Oh, it started as an experiment. We wanted to create a temporal anchor, something that could fix a moment in time, absolutely. But instead we created this, a point where all moments exist at once, where time doesn't flow, it accumulates. I fought to maintain a single timeline, a single self. Around me, I could see my team struggling to do the same. Charles was flickering between being a young recruit and a seasoned commander. Rod existed as both man and machine, his future cyborg self overlapping with his present human form. Yuki was there too, all versions of him, even the one that had died at Site 91. Plant flowers blooming from his eyes in one timeline while he stood whole in another. The Foundation will send more teams, Charles managed to say, his voice shifting in pitch as his age fluctuated. They'll find a way to contain this. Oh, they already have, Thornfield said sadly. They will, they did. Every team that comes here becomes a part of the recursion. Every attempt to shut it down has already happened, is happening, and will happen. We're all just echoes, playing out our roles in an endless loop. This fear pulsed again stronger this time. I saw myself making decisions that I hadn't made yet. Saw myself pulling the pin on a grenade. Saw myself walking into the sphere. Saw myself turning and leaving. All equally valid and equally real. There is one way, Thornfield said, and suddenly he was young, the age that he had been when he started the experiment. The sphere, it feeds on causality, on the connections between cause and effect. If somebody were to enter it, to become a part of it, they might be able to collapse the wave function, force all these scattered timelines into a single moment. But they would be erased, Charles finished. Not killed, but erased from time itself. I looked at my team and my family, saw all their past and future selves, saw every mission that we had been on and would go on and might have gone on. I saw Parker's sacrifice, Rod's bravery, Yuki's hollow eyes. I saw myself broken by years of fighting things that should not exist. In one timeline, I was already walking toward the spear. No, don't do it. Charles reached for me, but his hand passed through empty air. I was already partially gone. Somebody has to, I said, my voice echoing. And I'm tired. I'm so tired of seeing good people die, of fighting a war that we can never win. Maybe this way I can make it mean something. The sphere welcomed me like an old friend. As I stepped inside, I felt myself tearing apart, spreading across every moment that I had ever experienced. I was at every mission, every loss, every small victory. I was the child who dreamed of being a hero and the man who had learned heroes that just died in different ways. But I was also in moments that had never happened, timelines where we had saved everyone. The chamber shuddered. The echoes began to fade, multiple versions of people collapsing into one. The sphere contracted, reality reasserting itself like a rubber band snapping back into place. As I dissolved into the timeline, I saw my team one final time. Charles, Rod, even Yuki. Tell them, I managed to say as I felt myself slipping away. Tell them why we do this. Not for the Foundation, not for some greater good, but for each other. For the chance that maybe somewhere in all these timelines, we get it right. The spear collapsed, taking me with it. Site 101 became just another abandoned facility. I don't exist anymore. Not in any way that matters. I'm just an echo. A story told in break rooms and debriefings. The agent who had walked into time itself and never walked out. But that's okay, because in the timeline that I chose, the one that became real, they all lived. They all got to go back home. Sometimes Charles will tell me when the light hits just right, that they all can see me. A shadow in the corner of their eye, a ghost of a ghost. Still standing watch and still a part of the team. Still fighting to keep the darkness at bay, even if I'm not really there.